What do you know, Sid?
There we
Here
go.
we are.
Here we
Welcome
are.
to the desert.
Thank you.
We're so happy that you're here.
So good to be here and out of freezing New York.
Let's get the obvious out of the way. We have the same last name.
We do, but we're not related. No, we are.
We are. So we are related. I will explain. We are distant cousins with the same last name. We are second cousins once removed.
Very good.
Which means that your grandfather and my great-grandfather were brothers.
Right.
Right?
And my father and your grandfather were first cousins. So yeah.
Right.
Same thing.
Well done.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting, just to give a little bit of a background before I start talking about your writing, we did not know each other until, I think it was around the year 2000. I remember getting a phone call. You can tell me if you remember this the same way. I was working at my office at Entertainment Weekly magazine, phone rang, or maybe we traded messages first, but then I think maybe you had seen the magazine and seen my name and thought we must be related, or maybe you knew we were, but we started chatting and became friends around that time.
Yeah, my version of the story is, it started, my version started earlier because it was my dad in, I think, early high school when I was like 14, 15. He was always talking to your grandfather.
Oh.
Because they were first cousins and sort of, the same generation. So he would always get off the phone and say, oh, that was the Connecticut Karger, John Karger, right?
I never heard about these conversations.
Yeah.
Oh.
They were kind of phone buddies, and then he gave me your number and name and said, this is your, second cousin, and I was in high school, and so I kind of like blew it off. And I was like, okay, I'll get to that. I'm in high school, and I think you were, out east, and I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, so, and then every year, I remember he would sort of, this is your cousin Dave again, you should give him a call. And so then it was finally, I moved to New York after college, and then I saw your name in Entertainment Weekly because I had my trustee subscription, and my dad was like, are you going to give him a call? And I said, I'll give him a call.
Well, I'm glad you did.
Yeah.
So I want people to know a little bit more about you before we talk about the books that you've written. You've had a really interesting career in the television world, and it's a career that a lot of people wouldn't even know exists.
Yes.
So I would love to hear you explain all the different things you did for Comedy Central or Saturday Night Live, the kind of sketch comedy that you've written.
Yeah, so I started actually in advertising as a copywriter and quickly did everything I wanted to do in that and got out of that, and then went to Comedy Central as like an in-house writer-director, which exactly no one knows what that is because we make these giant sort of epic kind of big production promos for all the shows. So we do these big splashy shoots and then I would write and direct them. And so I was working with all the Comedy Central greats at the time. It was, like when Jon Stewart, the first iteration of Jon Stewart on The Daily Show, and when South Park was peaking, and Amy Schumer and Sarah Silverman and all those people had great big shows. So I would come out here and I'd, in LA and do these big shoots, and it was great because I was working with all the talent, and then I was always kind of like looking to the next thing. So I was writing my screenplays and thinking about novels, which I thought would come way later. And I ended up getting on this sort of freelance pool of writers for Saturday Night Live, which was the Weekend Update. At the time it was Seth Meyers and Amy Poehler doing it, so that was cool.
Wow.
But I would literally, finish my work at Comedy Central, shut my office door, and then do like jokes for Saturday Night Live. So I was double dipping at the time.
Wow.
Don't tell anyone at Comedy Central that. And then I started sort of freelance writing as a joke writer for like Billy on the Street, which is Billy Eichner's show. So it was like 3 jobs, and then of course my own writing at the same time. So it got to the point where I felt like I was cheating on Comedy Central, and I became sort of a working screenwriter based on a script that I had written and got a little bit of attention, and I finally left after like 10 years Comedy Central of being in television. Yeah.
Right. Was it a hard decision to know when it was time to go? Because was a TV career something that was always in your head of what you wanted to do, or was it kind of a stepping stone to doing something else more independent like you're doing now?
I definitely wanted to write a novel, since I was a little kid. I wanted to write books, and I ended up writing there was, I don't know if you guys remember, but Choose Your Own Adventure
Sure.
series. It was like, I was obsessed with those, and they were, I had, written one when I was 12 years old, and it was terrible, and it was like an imitation of one of those books, and it was sort of, like turn to page 12 if you want the princess to slay the dragon kind of thing. And so I wrote one of those, and it was awful, but I kind of was like, okay, I'm going to do this one day, and friends and family were, encouraging and say, when are you going to write your next book? And I'm like, I'm 12, give me a minute here. And then I fell in love with movies. As a teenager growing up in the suburbs of Chicago, it was John Hughes land, and he was shooting Breakfast Club and 16 Candles and all those movies. And I didn't know anyone in Hollywood, so it was sort of like this person who's close by, who I never met, but
Right.
he's in the area doing these things, and Ordinary People with Robert Redford shot in our hometown. And so it's sort of like a semi-accessible thing. And then I found out John Hughes, it was pre-internet, so you read in an article, whatever that is, in the newspaper, that John Hughes went into advertising as a copywriter
Right.
to go into movies. And I'm like, I'll do that path. And so that's what I kind of did. And then, I knew I wanted to be close to the entertainment world. And so I was very focused on Comedy Central because I had grown up, again, in Chicago with Second City in the background, and being obsessed with that, and forcing my parents to take me to improv shows very inappropriately as a kid. And seeing Tina Fey and all those people kind of perform on stage made a huge impact. So I wanted to be in the comedy world. And then, throughout that entire time, I was writing screenplays and, again, shutting my office door and working on original spec ideas and things like that. And the one screenplay kind of took off. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I'll write a book in my third act. So I'll do movies, and then I'll sit on a porch overlooking the sunset and work on my novel. And the opportunity kind of came before that. So I came full circle to the 12-year-old in me writing that book, and ended up writing during the pandemic. So it was sort of, everyone's at home, I have more time at home, now I'm going to finally write this book.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but so The Bump is your second book. Your first book, Best Men. This is a 2-book deal, though, that you got from your
Right.
publisher. Did that surprise you? I would have been scared out of my mind at the thought of doing 2 books like that.
It was very surprising, because writing screenplays, I was used to writing, the entire thing, and then you kind of bring it to the marketplace and try to sell it or get people attached to make it and things like that. So I had sort of pitched ideas to my now book agent, and we had landed on one, which was Best Men, my first book. And I wrote sort of like an extensive outline and wrote half of the book. Mm-hmm. And my book agent was like, okay, we're going to bring this to the marketplace. And I was like, no, you can't. Like, don't do that, because you're setting me up for failure. And I will happily finish this to the end, because I was so used to doing that with screenplays. But he was super confident in it, and literally the week before he brought it to different publishers, he said, do you have a second idea for a book? And this had been percolating for years, and I was like, yes, here's this. And so I kind of wrote a mini outline for that. And it was one of the most like mind-blowing sort of experiences, just in terms of, once in a lifetime career things happening, where he brought it out to like 10 publishers. They were going to have, an auction on a Tuesday at 1 o'clock. You had to get in your bids, and at 5 to 1, he's like, well, we got one. I'm like, that's all we needed. And I was happy. And I ended up, it was like 1:15, like 8 more came in. So it was like this bidding war for 24 hours. My partner, who's in the art auction world, sort of was helping me through all the terminology and things like that. And it was just one of the most mind-blowing. And then that little idea that I had for The Bump, exactly what you said, is like, now I have to figure this out. Wow. But so it was in the middle of lockdown, pandemic, and I was happily, we couldn't go anywhere. So I was kind of like, I finished Best Men, did a publicity tour, book tour and everything, and then immediately went into writing The Bump from page one. And it's been like a 4-year sort of process at this point.
What do you attribute all of this to? I mean, obviously, you're an excellent writer. I mean, your writing is so fun. It's a little catty. It's so entertaining. Do you also attribute it to kind of a burgeoning genre? I mean, everywhere you go in bookstores, there's all these great, what I would call kind of almost beach reads, but elevated beach reads,
Yeah.
right? And a lot of them have these kind of pastel colors. I mean, and they're very inviting. And then there's this subgenre of kind of the gay romance, the gay comedy. What's
Yeah.
it been like for you to see these genres take off the way that they have?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's sort of like the last 5 to 10 years, I would say, like the rom-com novel has become a thing. It started off in sort of romance, paper book, Harlequin, and it's morphed through the years. And like the last decade, it's become much more unique voices, people telling their own sort of love stories. And I, again, being a movie lover, I grew up loving rom-coms and the 80s, Nora Ephron, and if there's a Nancy Meyers movie on, I'll have to, clear my schedule and watch it from start to finish. And so I loved rom-coms, and I still do. And so when I started seeing these books in the bookstores, there were gay rom-coms about two guys written by women. And I would read them and I would think, how did they know what this is like? I mean, from the comedy to the rom, it was like they just got it completely right. And I was like, okay, I think I've done my research in this area, so I think I could apply what I know into this genre. And I tried it. And then when I did meet my first, my now book agent, he sort of articulated what I had been thinking, and it sort of crystallized there that like there is a need for, it's called own voice, where it's someone writing about sort of their own experience. So there was a need for sort of like in the marketplace of a gay man writing about, gay romance between two men. So I was like, yes, this is, it came to a perfect storm timing.
How cognizant are you when you're working of wanting to differentiate yourself, your voice, from other things that are out there, or do you just have to let it happen naturally and hope that it connects with readers?
I definitely let it happen naturally, and I had I'd read a few sort of big gay rom-coms, Red, White, and Royal Blue, and books like that, and they were more rom than com. And I really wanted, coming from a comedy background, I was like, okay, I want to make this as funny as I think it could be, and less, Best Men and The Bump is sort of a rom-com, but not really. But the first one is definitely a rom-com, but it's more about the main character's full life. So it's sort of 360, his job, his first, coming to New York, and all the firsts that you experience, as a 20, 30 something. So I wanted, most rom-coms fit a structure where it's like, it's all about the couple getting together, and I kind of wanted to have a little more of, and of course you're gonna, readers want the thing that follows the structure completely, and then the readers who are happy that, oh, you've, deviated from that sort of trope. So yeah, I definitely learned that the hard way.
Well, The Bump is fascinating because it's a rom-com about a couple that's already together.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it's about, so we should tell people, it's about these two guys, Wyatt and Biz, who are about to have their first child via a surrogate, and they decide to take a road trip together and visit a lot of their favorite places like Provincetown, and well, at least that's the plan, before the baby is born. And basically the plan gets thrown out the window because all these things happen, all of these twists and turns. And of course, me being so stupid, I read or you told me about the second book. I didn't even put it together that maybe part of the reason you were writing this book is that you and your partner, Jean-Michel, might be having a child of your own, which you did 4 months ago.
Yes.
So congratulations.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously there's a connection there. Obviously, these two things are not a coincidence.
Correct. It's definitely not about us. It's not an autobiography, but my partner and I had started talking about having a baby, years ago, and how do we do it, and sort of adoption versus surrogacy. It's not easy, And we did our homework, and it became overwhelming, the sort of amount of research you have to do and the complicated ways you have to do it, and it literally takes a few villages. And so we kind of put it on pause, life got in the way, we kind of went back to it, and then the pandemic hit, everything sort of pre and post-pandemic, but when it hit, we're like, okay, that's just not happening. It's like, it's not gonna happen, we're not gonna, we'll be 80 if it does. And so we put it on a huge pause, and then I started writing The Bump, and both books sort of became like wish fulfillment, where we're stuck in our houses, so I want to go to Provincetown, and I'm going to go visit my family in Chicago, and I'm going to go to a wedding in Colorado that's Star Wars themed. That happens in the book. So it's things like that where it's just, I was living vicariously through these characters, and then they're going to have a baby, which maybe we'll do, but I doubt it, who knows? And so it was really just like a fun ride that I wanted to take. And so I really thought the baby was not going to happen, and then slowly, gradually, we got out of the pandemic, and things started up again, and we started the process over, and it kind of clicked. The book had already been written, so my wish fulfillment was out there, and I kind of like maybe, made it happen.
You made it happen.
Yeah, in these 4 months. So
how have the last 4 months been?
I haven't slept since October. So yeah. It's been fun. It's amazing. I mean, it's funny because people like yourself, like they'll read the book and then hear about our journey. The characters make fun of the word journey because it's said so often during the process, and they think, oh, that's which one's Wyatt and which one is Biz, the characters, and they're neither of us. No. It's fun to imagine.
It's interesting because, knowing you're, I would say, shy. You're dry in a good way, but then I read what you've done and I'm like, whoa, who is this guy? And it's just so interesting to see you let out these different creative sides of yourself and maybe different sides of your personality that are deep and hidden in there. What would you say your writing allows you to do or pursue that's different from your everyday life?
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly right, because I grew up completely, I don't think I spoke until like a couple months ago. No, but I was severely reserved and shy, and I wanted to write, but at the same time I also wanted to be an actor because I loved movies and TV and plays and everything. And I think I tried out for like James and the Giant Peach in high school and choked. And I'm like, okay, I'm not going back. I'll never do that. So writing became a way for me to sort of like be the actor, be in that situation, and then eventually work with actors and directors. And I think a lot of writers are kind of reserved that way, that, they tend to be, I was always the observer. So I was just a sponge of taking in everyone else's stories, and I was like, oh yeah, I guess I have to like contribute here. Yeah. So it was helpful in a way being that observer, and then becoming a director with Comedy Central sort of forced me to become out of my shell and like talking to people on social. So that was a very big sort of eye opener. But then I can kind of go back and retreat into the stories and become, live vicariously through them. And yeah, and it's interesting because I feel like I'm sort of like the blank slate, and then when I'm writing, the characters are those parts of me that's like, there's a little, teeny tiny part of me that's like this character, but I'll heighten it and make it his entire personality. Or if it's someone I've met, a lot of people, it's the funny thing when you write a book, a novel, it's like 100% of your friends and family think all the characters are them. And so whether it's the main character, a side character, or like, a waitress in a diner, they're like, that's me, right? I'm like, kind of. It's it's that person that it's someone that you've seen on the street, it's your imagination. So it's all that, it's yourself kind of put into a blender and it comes out.
So in The Bump, when we hear about one of the characters having cousins in Palm Springs that they want to visit, that's not me?
It's you.
Okay, thank God. Yes. How many people have you said that to?
Let's go with that.
Okay, it's obviously there's another cousin I don't know about, and that's okay. but I'm the one here talking to you. So. One thing that is really cool about The Bump in relation to your first book, Best Men, is that you change up, I guess you would call it like dual perspective. So alternating chapters are told from the point of view of each of the two guys. So Wyatt narrates a chapter and then it leads into the next chapter, which Biz then narrates. And it's fascinating, and you do it so seamlessly because you're picking up from the way one person perceives something to the other one. And I'd be curious to know at what point during the process of writing The Bump, which by the way, you're all gonna get a copy of on your way out. I'd be curious, oh, you already got it on the way in?
Oh, good.
By the way, you're all gonna get a copy of the book on the way in. I'd be curious to know at what point during the process you decided that's how you were going to tell this story.
Yeah, so The Best Men was written in first person, present tense, and again, coming off of screenwriting, it's sort of similarly written and just in present tense, not first person. But so that I had a blast doing that, and because you can become the character. And then when I sat down to write The Bump, I wanted to do something completely different, and I'm like, okay, this is going to be that omniscient, third-person narrator who sounds like Alec Baldwin, and and I got really into that. And I wrote a draft of that, and I got to the end of it, and I thought, working with my editors and stuff, it seemed cold and sort of removed, and it didn't feel as intimate as the character in Best Men. And so we decided, let's maybe take one of these characters and write it from their, first person again from one of the perspectives. And I was like, what if we did a dual perspective? So I went back and basically rewrote the entire thing.
No way.
From scratch. And it was also third person past tense, so I had to change it to the present tense. And
that sounds exhausting.
My eyes were bleeding. Yeah, and that's why I'm wearing glasses now. But it made a world of difference. Yes. And it was really fun because I had two characters to play with, and hopefully their contrast comes out, the differences in their voices, and it's like the Barbie dolls. You sort of like mix up the Barbie dolls and sort of like this one's talking here and this one's here, so it was like that.
Wow.
Yeah, but it was a long process. It took a minute to sort of get it right. And when I did it, I was like, why didn't I start it that way? Because Best Men came out sort of easier in a way, not easier, but I just love that voice. And so I've sort of committed now for the next book to kind of do that again, of first person present tense, and so we'll see. And then I was also toying with the idea of like can I write a screenplay like that where it's like actually the person talking the action lines, because usually it's just the narrator of saying Mark walks into the room and then Mark speaks. I think Oppenheimer was written in first person of like,
oh really?
I entered the room and then it's him speaking.
Which is weird because an audience would never know how it was written.
Yeah.
Huh. Okay, so let me pick up on what you just said. Next book?
Next book I'm working on now. The only thing I can say about it is I'm drawn to mysteries, so it's going to have a mystery element and maybe a murder, a little bit of murder. We'll see.
Okay.
Yeah, so I just love like White Lotus. I just read a book, I Might Be in Trouble, about, it's sort of like a little bit of a comedic mystery, so I'm kind of drawn to those kind of stories. So that's all I can kind of say about it, just because I don't know what it's going to be.
That's fine. When it comes to The Bump, getting back to the dual perspective, what I also find interesting is that I never get the sense that you're trying to paint either Wyatt or Biz as the hero or the villain. I mean, and at different points in the book, we as the audience we're always on both their sides, but you switch the allegiance a little bit, like, oh, I would handle this way, or I'm a little bit more like Biz this way. Was that a conscious decision of yours to always, have it calibrated like that so no one was tilting one way or the other too much?
For sure, yeah. Like each chapter, when I was writing the Wyatt chapter, I'm like, oh, he's the main character. And then I'd go to Biz and like, he's definitely the main character. And I would kind of go back and forth, so they're the stars of their own, respective chapters. But it's an interesting thing because the characters, one of them is Wyatt. He's sort of more controlling and has things under, he likes things. He's a TV director, so he storyboards. He's used to storyboarding out commercials, and he storyboards out his life. So everything's really organized, super put together. He knows exactly the itinerary they're going to take. Where Biz is more loosey-goosey, spontaneous. He wants to literally hop into an RV and sort of wander the country, which I'm kind of envious of. I would never do, but I'd love to do that. So they both kind of have their own, and Wyatt, the controlled one, is like super cool about having a baby. He's not freaking out at all, where Biz is like, oh my God, how am I gonna be a dad? And then they kind of dovetail, no spoilers, but like by the end of it, Wyatt starts to freak out and Biz is like, we got this. So they both kind of, hopefully, are the main characters, so yeah.
I think what people will notice, whether they've read it before or whether they're about to read it, the pacing is so great in the book. I mean, and just from the first couple pages, stuff keeps happening like at a breakneck pace and feels really fun. How did you, maybe you were storyboarding it, maybe you had Post-its. I'd be curious to know how you mapped out all the different beats, all the different twists in each chapter.
Yeah, I'm a little like Wyatt, the organized storyboarded one, because I like my note cards. So especially with screenwriting, I got used to doing it with that. And so I tend to write novels similarly, where it's like act 1, 2, and 3, and have all the storyboard note cards sort of scattered around the room. I don't have a board, I just put it on the floor. And so it's semi-organized. So I really try to plan out, okay, this is Wyatt's journey, this is Biz's arc, what they're gonna go through, and have those goalposts. And it is, like I always say, it is sort of a rom-com, because it fits the structure of a rom-com, even though they've been a couple for many years. So they have their meet cute, they hate each other at first, they're kind of getting into each other, and then they take one step forward and 2 steps back, and and then they kiss at the end. So it fits a little bit of the rom-com structure. So I try to nail those kind of goalposts that you see within that genre. But I definitely had to figure out, how they dovetail, and that's always, I need something visual to sort of look at for that.
How has the fact that you've written 2 books in the last couple of years affected the time and ability and interest that you've had in screenwriting?
It's hard. I mean, I left Comedy Central a few years ago and became a working screenwriter. So I folded the books into the screenwriting. So I've sold a few screenplays, optioned them, done rewrites and like open writing assignments, which are like, a studio production company would have a book that they want to adapt, or a magazine article or an idea, and have done that. So when those things are kind of coming at me, I'm like, move over, book. And I'm like, go back to the screenwriting. But when I finished The Bump, I immediately wanted to go back to screenwriting and write something shorter. And then, I'd finish the screenplay, and then I'd want to go immediately back to a book. So there are 2 kind of totally different writing muscles, and I enjoy both. I mean, the screenwriting is much more economic and exact, and like you have to have action, dialogue, and kind of not waste your words, where like the books, it's like someone else is writing them and they're pouring out of me in a way, and it's like, who's writing this? And
Really?
and then I get to the end of it and I'm like, who wrote that? And I have to go back and edit the whole thing, but because it gives you it's much more liberating, because you can think longer and sort of get deeper into character and their internal life. So both of them, I love sort of the torture of both of them I love, because when you kind of get that, the synapses going and things connect, and like this character does something that connects back to this storyline, that sort of like high of that cancels out any of the torture that you go through. I don't, like a lot of writers talk about how they hate writing, and you kind of hate it, but at the same time, I'm like, how can you hate it if, so you have to find those things that override the hate.
Makes sense.
It's hard.
Anyone who has the copy of The Bump in their hands can see that you have quotes on there from Amy Schumer, you have Molly Shannon, you have Anderson Cooper. Obviously, you mentioned that you did promos for Amy Schumer, so I understand the connection there. I want to know the connection to the other two, and I want to know how painful it must have been for you to ask these people to blurb your book.
You know the pain. Yeah, I mean, Amy Schumer's, I think, on Best Men, and
Right.
it's funny because we worked together at the beginning of her career and then sort of at the end of her time at Comedy Central, and that's a character of like a complete full story arc where it was literally me and her running around Washington Square Park shooting promos with like a ragtag team, 2 cameramen, and like a 105-degree day. And she was like, yeah, whatever you want to do. And then I'll never forget, she just kind of like, she's like, all right, I'm going home. And she walked down into the subway. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. She was sort of like homegrown,
Right.
you know, Comedy Central. They really kind of, she was raised at Comedy Central with her stand-up and her shows. And then I worked with her years later, and we were, for the upfronts, it's like the TV, you know, thing with the advertisers. And I was backstage as like the head writer of these upfronts for all the shows for Comedy Central. And she came in with like, it was just literally me sitting there with a computer, like working on jokes. And she came in with like 3 giant bodyguards, like, you know, don't, and I'm like, it's just me, I'm not gonna do anything. And she was, you know, she was great, but it was sort of like the machine of her going from homegrown to giant success was something to behold. And so we had kind of, and then friends of mine from Comedy Central worked with her, and so we kind of had that connection, and she said yes immediately and read it and blurbed it, which I was shocked by, because she's, you know, busy.
Right. Okay, go on, Molly.
And then Molly Shannon, I have a screenplay that's had many lives through the years. It was on the Blacklist, which is like the Hollywood's sort of most
Best
liked
unproduced scripts.
Yeah, you would think it's not most liked because it's called the Blacklist, but it's the most liked scripts of the year. So it kind of, that was the thing that kind of got me my agent and manager, and that at one point had Miley Cyrus to be in it when she was wanting to act, and then her career took off more, and then so it's had all these people attached to be either in it or direct it or produce it, and it's Molly Shannon was going to be in it, and so we became, you know, working friendly, and I think she did both books, which was again insane, and you know, completely grateful for that kind of thing. So.
And Anderson Cooper hosted your book launch events for both books at the Strand bookstore in New York.
Yeah, so Anderson Cooper and I met years ago socially through friends, and like we've kept in touch ever since. And same thing with him. It was sort of like we would run around New York sort of socially, you know, when he was sort of like the late night ABC or something, and then he got the game show The Mole.
The Mole, right.
And I'll never forget being out with him, and someone was like, "Are you the host of The Mole?" And I was like, "Oh, he's too famous for me now. I can never." And then he's now Anderson Cooper. But he was grateful. I mean, I'm completely appreciative that he did that. Again, all these people who don't have time for a novel like made the time. So it's kind of amazing.
I love it.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to know if you consider your writing to be a political act, a social commentary act, given the fact that you're writing about these gay relationships, these gay couples in a very precarious time. Obviously, you were not. Obviously, things were a little bit better a couple of years ago when you were writing it. But how do you view your work? Do you see it like that, or are you just here to give people a good time?
I mean, I kind of don't look at it through a political lens. I have noticed part of the reason why I wanted to write, you know, for years I would just avoid writing anything about gay life, and just wanted to write sort of the thing that was, you know, more of the zeitgeist, I guess. But at a certain point I was like, you know, this is my life, I want to write about it. And historically, you know, gay novels and movies and TV have always been sort of the tragic version of it, whether it's, you know, AIDS or suicide or serial killers. And so it's been very dark, and all those stories are super important, and they should be told, and they, you know, but I didn't feel like I had a take on one of those, and I was like, I want to write about the joy that we experience, in our daily lives that are just like everybody else's. And I had never seen two gay guys having a baby in a book, and I was like, okay, this is an interesting story to explore because it's joyous and it's something everyone can kind of relate to in a way. So I'm in it for the good time. I mean, I want to make, the more dark and complicated the political world and our world in general gets, the more I'm like, where are the jokes? Like, let's have fun, let's make some people laugh, because I feel like it's always needed in a way,
Yeah. All right, a couple last things before I open it up to you all. So think about some questions you might have for Sid. What's on your bucket list? What have you not gotten a chance to do that you still want to?
Get a movie made, yeah. Just to have, I started writing this, I wrote the screenplay to Best Men, and so that has a big producer attached to make it with her production team and a first-time director that she's worked with, so that's like kind of...
That sounds very promising, like it's...
Yeah, I mean,
on the way.
It's sort of in development and actors are reading it, and so just, being a working screenwriter is interesting because you're working and you're like in the system, but not having that credit. There are just so many people who have that, whether they've been writing spec after spec and working, but not actually getting something on the screen. So that's the big goal. But it doesn't have to be a book of mine. It could be an original thing. But I honestly want to keep, when I was that 12-year-old writing the Choose Your Own Adventure book and thinking this is never going to happen again until I'm, in my third act, I'm grateful that it did happen a little sooner than I imagined. So I want to keep, because talking to agents and editors, and they're like, well, you have your screenwriting. And I'm like, no, but I'm really like, they think of me as a screenwriter who's writing books, and I'm kind of, I want to do both at the same time, so.
Would you write a screenplay for The Bump?
I'm working with the director on that too.
Oh.
Yeah. So we'll see.
It's like going to be a race.
Yeah.
And it must be so weird to have not that much control over what might happen. Like, that would drive me nuts.
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, because the screenwriting process is so collaborative, and you first do it for yourself, and then you're working with producers, and then they have their notes, and if it's multiple producers, you go crazy because they have conflicting notes, and then then you get an actor, and then they're like, I'm Nicole Kidman, I'm going to put my spin on this, and then you work with the director, and you're like, let's do it this way, and so you have to do another so you're constantly, on set, rewriting the thing, where the book is literally just, they're both pieces of art, but there was something purely beautiful about the book because it's really just you and then your editor, gentle suggestions of what to do, and you're like, okay, I'll pick and choose the ones I want, and at the end of the day, it's just you and your editor. So they're two totally, I find the joy in both, but they're two totally different animals, yeah.
And then finally, what would you say the general reaction has been from people that know you really well? I mean, whether it's your partner or your family or your great friends, when they've read your work, like, what are some things that they've said that really made you happy?
It's amazing. Just in the age of social media, just because I can't imagine being Stephen King and writing, Carrie, and like you just put this book out and it's like you don't hear anything. Where social media, you're bombarded by people just sending you messages and coming, a student reading it at the library, saying like, I'm so glad you wrote this book because you made me feel seen, multiple messages of those, and I'm always screenshotting those and like saving those in case they regret it later and delete it. And then, people come out of the woodwork because for movies, it's a little different because people can actually like, I'm at the beach reading your book, and here's a picture of me holding your book, and it's this physical object that makes it so cool. And you hear from people you were not friends with in high school that want to let you know they read your book, and now you're friends.
Okay.
And so that's amazing too. But just hearing from, and they have these lives that keep going. So Best Men, came out in early 2023. and I'm still hearing from people, and I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot about that one. So,
Well, I congratulate you. It's
thank you.
it's so exciting to see what you've done.
Thank you.
And I look forward to seeing coming up what's next. But I want to know what you all want to know from Sid. Don't be shy. Yes.
So the efficacy of blurbs has just been in the news. You guys see that?
I haven't.
There was a news article about the efficacy of blurbs.
I forget the publishing house.
Oh.
Has stopped entirely.
Oh wow.
Just talking about like. is it
Simon and
really
Schuster.
online?
Oh wow.
Do you feel like but finish what you're saying.
No, that was it.
Oh.
And then they interviewed a bunch of readers and bookstores who said whether they looked at blurbs or didn't look at blurbs, and they just wondered.
Do you get the sense that the blurbs were helpful or not?
Kind of. I mean, it comes up in conversation, like Amy Schumer, but I don't know if people. I feel like true readers who are in it for the stories, I don't think they're going to totally care one way or another. Maybe it's a little bit of a marketing thing, but I know. I mean, as you said, it's complete torture for authors.
They made that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, authors hate it.
Have to ask other authors who are also busy.
Right.
Yeah.
Authors hate
But
having to ask other people to do it.
surprisingly, other authors are so generous, and they also give their time. But when you get with a publishing company, and they ask you who's the most famous person you know, you're like, I thought this was your job. So,
Right.
so it is a bit of. I mean, I wouldn't say I want to see it go away, but it would be interesting to see if someone did market research on it to see how much it actually helps.
Man, I was very relieved when my book came out. I did a book called 50 Oscar Nights where I interviewed 50 Oscar winners about winning an Oscar. And my editor was like, you know what, Dave, I think we're not going to need a quote on this because you already have these 50 celebrities in the book. And I was like, thank God. Because I was dreading having to ask someone to read it and
Were you
blurb it.
trying to think of the most obscure person you've ever met who's super famous? That was like,
I should have, but
Yeah.
I never even had to get to that point. Thank
Yeah,
God.
good.
All right, I saw another hand. Yes.
I just want to comment. I really admire people who are open to seeing
thank you.
The gentleman said that he admires writers who are authentic and gets that vibe from Sid. I
everyone
agree,
hear that?
He is. Yes, sir.
is directing a movie on your bucket list since you did direct before.
Question is whether directing a movie is on his bucket list.
Yes and no. I kind of got very comfortable being sort of behind the scenes, and I kind of got a little bit of the directing bug out of me during the 10 years of Comedy Central because it's such a different muscle, and you have to talk to people, and you really have to wake up early. It's the most physically and emotionally exhausting thing. So the older I get, the more I'm like, I don't know about that. But then when I do see sort of like the best, when a director can actually put their stamp on it as an independent director, an independent film, and it's sort of like they put their amazing soundtrack that they've had for years. I wrote The Bump and Best Men with a lot of music cues embedded into the story. So on the flip side, the idea of sort of having that control of directing your own movie, putting in your own soundtrack, choosing your actors, it's appealing. So I'm not going to necessarily fight for it over. I always think there's always a better director than me who can do these books. So if someone was like, here, you direct it, I'd be like, okay, fine.
Yes.
First, I have to say, my husband and I did surrogacy, and we have 10-year-old twins.
Oh.
It's getting easier.
Oh, good.
It's getting easier.
Phew.
10-year-old twins from surrogacy. He's saying it gets easier. Okay.
Good to
The
know.
question for you is, in so many traditional rom-com books, there are so many of the same ones done over and over again. In the gay field, have you gotten any pushback from your publisher saying, oh, someone already did that, we don't need to do that again?
Whether he's gotten pushback from his editor publisher as far as writing a gay novel, like this has already been done, this kind of story has been done.
Like, one was enough, we don't need another.
Right.
We-
It's interesting because I was the one who stopped myself because for the second book I was like, oh, I could do another rom-com where it's the meet cute, they're 25, they're super cute, they're going to get together, they're going to hate each other, they're going to get together, and follow that. And I was like, okay, I already did that with Best Men. I want to know what this, it's not the same couple, but like what is an older couple, what are they dealing with? So it wasn't the publisher, it was me.
Thank you all so much. And Sid Karger,
Thank you.
thank you, and congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for being here.